الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا وعظيمنا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد
وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين وأصحابه الغر الميامين. الحمد لله الذي جعلنا من المتمسكين بولاية سيدي ومولاي علي بن أبي طالب.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. أما بعد، يقول الله في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل لا أسألكم عليه أجرا إلا المودة في القربى. What is the legal and social significance of writing a will in Islamic thought? In this, the second of our 10-part analysis of the final will of the imam, we seek to examine the position of the will within Islamic law and Islamic sociological thought in general. A will, or the writing of a will, has existed with the human being since time immemorial. Whichever of the great empires you study in history, you'll always find that they sought to encourage their citizens to write a will before they died. If you look, for example, at the Egyptians and the Hebrews, long before the Greeks and the Romans, they had encouraged their citizens that the best method of safeguarding their assets was to write a will. That we normally accumulate a set of assets within our life, and that the best way to ensure that these assets are safeguarded is by including them in a will before we pass away. You therefore find in the world today that you have, for example, will kits. How to write a will with a step-by-step procedure and guide in order that everybody is aware of what their responsibilities are in relation to the assets which they have accumulated in their life. And the religion of Islam is no different. And the idea that within the religion of Islam, writing a will is one of the most important acts in the religion. And the reason it's important is threefold. The first reason why it's important to write a will within the religion of Islam is a legal reason. In which way? In the fact that Islamic law seeks to protect 5 areas in our existence. Islamic law, if someone was to ask you what's the philosophy of Islamic law, Islamic law has 5 aims. Number 1, to protect the property of a human. Number 2, the honor of a human. Number 3, the intellect of a human. Number 4, the life of a human. And number 5, the religion of a human. When Islamic law seeks to protect your property and your honor and your intellect and your life and your religion, one of the main areas it seeks to protect is your property. In which way? In that property which you have accumulated in your life, those assets which you have accumulated, Islamic law seeks to protect them, as in our assets may vary from one person to another. You may have someone whose assets are their houses, their apartments, their hotels. Another, his furniture may be an asset. Another, his pet may be an asset. Another, his pen may be an asset. All of these are assets which we accumulate in our life. According to Islamic law, 1/3 of those assets which you have accumulated, you are allowed to dispose of in your will in any which way you want. But 2/3 can have to be given out according to the Sharia. What do we mean? I mean, for example, now if I've accumulated a set of assets in my life, 1/3 of them I make a decision as to how they are to be spent. 1/3 of those assets I can write in my will. They can be given in particular ways. 2/3 of them, the Quran ascertains portions, either to your wife, or for example to your children, or to your grandchildren, or for example to your parents. You find that Islamic law focused very much on which idea? Islamic law focused very much on the idea that 1/3 and 2/3 proportion has to be written and undertaken by yourself. Otherwise, many Muslims today live under common law, not religious law. As in many of us today who are living in America or living in London, the way that our shares or our assets are spread is different from Islam. Islam says 1/3 you dispose of in your will, 2/3 the Sharia looks after. Whereas if you were to go, for example, today to common law, that government of the time looks after your assets and they spread it in the way which they want to. Therefore, on the first level, Islam recognizes the importance of writing a will. Why? Because legally, unless you've written a will, that government within which you live will take over your assets and spread them in a way which you never intended. As in, I may have had an asset which I intended to be given to my mother, or to my father, or to my children. If I die before writing a will, can a member of my family go to the government of the time and say, he intended to give this to us? No, they'll turn around to you and say, no. Those assets are now our property. We have seized them, and we will clarify what is to be done with them. On the first level, therefore, Islam focused on writing a will because of legal repercussions. On the second level, Islam came forward and said there are social repercussions to writing a will. Which social repercussions? How many arguments do you know in Muslim households today are because of the will? And because either of the terms of the will or the lack of writing of a will. You'll find today there are brothers who do not speak to each other because of a will. There are sisters who don't speak to each other because of the will. There are in-laws who have no relationships with each other because of the will. You ask them why, what is the issue? They reply to you, the issue is that our father, for example, intended that this house is to come to me, and that car is to go to him, and that furniture is to go to her. Whereas our father did not leave behind a will. Therefore, there's a sense of confusion now between us. I believe that this belongs to me, whereas my brother believes that this belongs to them. You find on the second level there is a social repercussion. Which social repercussion? The social repercussion that unless we write a will, there's going to be clashes between our family. On the third level, there's a spiritual meaning to writing a will. Which spiritual meaning? Some of us may have prayers we haven't completed in our life, isn't it? Some of us, we may have gone through our youth without completing our prayers. Some of us may have missed fasts when we were younger. Some of us may not have had the chance to go to pilgrimage. Therefore, when we write in a will that all my life I did not perform this task, or I wanted to perform this act but I couldn't, I could include this within my will, and therefore this issue will be resolved. In other words, the religion of Islam, what did it come forward and said? The religion came forward and said that there's a legal and a social and a spiritual significance to writing a will. Let's examine the philosophy of writing a will from the Quran and from the narrations and see what are the interesting anecdotes that emerge from the most famous wills in Islamic history and see how they relate to our time today. The most famous verse for writing a will in the Quran is chapter 2, verse 180. Because many people today will come and say, where in the Quran does it oblige me to write a will? As in, if I don't want to write a will, I don't have to. You find in the Quran, chapter 2, verse 180 is known as the verse which discusses the importance of writing a will. Notice that this verse does not put an age limit as to when you write a will. Rather, what does the verse say? Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Kutiba alaykum. Whenever an ayah in the Quran begins with Kutiba alaykum, that means it's been prescribed upon you from God. For example, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, Kutiba alaykum as-siyam kama kutiba ala alladhina min qablikum. O you who believe, fasting has been prescribed upon you like it's been prescribed on those before you. Or for example in the Quran, Kutiba alaykum al-qisas. Retaliation has been prescribed upon you. An eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth, and so on, as you know, within the narratives. This verse begins, Kutiba alaykum. إذا حضر أحدكم الموت إن ترك خيرا الوصية للوالدين والأقربين بالمعروف. It has been prescribed upon you that every time you reflect upon death, that whatever khair you have left behind, you must include it in a wasiyah. please understand the terminologies here. That God tells us within the Quran, it's been prescribed upon you whenever you reflect upon death. Some people, when they translated this verse, they translated it as, it has been prescribed upon you that when death comes, write a will. The question is, do any of us know when our death is going to come? As in, when someone translates it like this, it's as if they know that, okay, at the age of 67, I'll write down my will, because at 67 and 3 months, I'm going to die. Nobody's got that access to a certificate except the angel of death. You find that, therefore, what did the verse mean? The verse meant, it's prescribed upon you. Every time you reflect upon death and its reality in your life, that wealth or those assets which you leave behind must be written in a will, which you yourself have ordained. You see, the verse says, كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمْ إِذَا حَضَرَ أَحَدَكُمُ الْمَوْتِ إِن تَرَكَ خَيْرًا الْوَصِيَّةِ. In the Arabic language, the word will is with what word? Arabic language, the word will is with the word wasiyah. Allah says, إِن تَرَكَ خَيْرًا الْوَصِيَّةُ لِلْوَالِدَيْنِ وَالْأَقْرَبِينَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ حَقًّا عَلَى الْمُتَّقِينَ. And ironically, this verse was used by Fatima al-Zahra, salawatullah wa salamu alayha. When Fatima al-Zahra responded to the person who took Fadak away from her, after the Prophet died, when Fadak was taken away from Fatima al-Zahra, the person responded by saying that what? Prophets don't leave behind inheritance. So what's this claim that Fadak is yours? She replied back with a series of verses from the Quran. That you say that I cannot inherit from my father? Have you not read the verse in the Quran that Sulaiman inherits from Dawood? Have you not read the verse in the Quran that Yahya inherits from Zakaria? And then she quoted this verse. Oh Khalifa, have you not read the verse in the Quran in chapter 2 verse 180? كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمْ إِذَا حَضَرَ أَحَدَكُمُ الْمَوْتِ إِن تَرَكَ خَيْرًا الْوَصِيَّةُ لِلْوَالِدَيْنِ وَالْأَقْرَبِينَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. That it's been prescribed upon you that when one of you comes upon death, that they write a will for those of their near kin. Am I not of the near kin of my father? Does my father not have near kin other than me? Who is there of his near kin for him to leave a belonging or an asset? And the irony is that Fadak belonged to Fatima before her father died. Fadak was given to Fatima al-Zahra 4 years before Rasulullah died. She only mentioned this verse in reply to the man who said that prophets don't leave behind inheritance. She said, if you disagree that Fadak was given to me 4 years before my father died, then at least agree that the Quran says that the nearest family can inherit according to the terms of the will. In other words, what did the Quran come and say? The Quran came and said that it's prescribed upon you, each one of us in this hall, not just someone who has hundreds of assets, because someone could come to me today and say, Sayyid Ammar, to tell you the truth, I don't have many assets. I have, for example, a car, I have an apartment, and nothing more. This car and apartment could be the cause of major clashes in your family after you die. You know that or no? This car, you think this car is a simple thing in your family when you pass away? I tell you, there'll be people who are willing to kill each other's reputations for that car. And there are others who are willing to come and destroy your apartment. The Quran said, even if you have an apartment or a car, or even, I tell you, subhanallah, these days, you will even find that something as trivial as a pen. Someone will say, there's no way a family will argue over a pen. You bring someone a Mont Blanc pen, an original one, which is about 20 years old, I tell you, there'll be people fighting over it and over its value. Or you bring something as trivial, for example, as a clock. That clock to you is trivial, but if that clock turns out to be 150 years old, don't be surprised if your grandmother, auntie and uncle are having a fight over it. In other words, what? In other words, the Quran was saying, number one, it's prescribed upon each one of you, that whenever you have that reflection upon death, that straight away you write a will, where you say that this is what I want disposed of in terms of these assets. And that's why you find Imam al-Sadiq salawatullah wa salamu alayhi. Imam al-Sadiq has a fantastic hadith when he states, Man mata bila wasiyya mata mitatin jahiliya. Now many of us would have heard a similar hadith to this. What does the hadith say? Whoever dies without writing their will, dies the death of someone in jahiliyyah. How many of you have heard of the hadith, Man mata wa lam ya'ruf imam zamanah, mata mitatin jahiliyyah, isn't it? Whoever dies without knowing the imam of their time dies the death of someone in ignorance. Imam al-Sadiq switches it round. He says, whoever dies without writing a will dies the death of someone in Jahiliyyah. What's the relationship between imama and a wasiyah? What's the relationship? Both of them will be asked about them on the day of judgment, isn't it? With our imam, there'll be a verse which says, يَوْمَ نَدْعُ كُلَّ أُنَاسٍ بِإِمَامِهِمْ. On the day of judgment, we will call everybody by their imam. Hence, there is a need for us to know the imam of our time, isn't there? Likewise, the imam says, in the same way you appreciate that on the day of judgment, you'll be asked about your imam. Likewise, on the day of judgment, you'll be asked about your will. The imam says, مَنْ مَاتَ بِلَا وَصِيَّةٍ مَاتَ مِيتَةٍ جَاهِلِيَّةٍ. The one who dies without a will dies the state of someone who died in the state of ignorance. The people of Jahiliyyah, did they believe in a day of judgment or no? They didn't believe in a day of judgment. They didn't believe there's a day they will be raised alive, to be questioned about their assets, to be questioned about what they left behind. Many of the people who surrounded the Prophet didn't believe in the day of judgment. That's why many of the Quranic verses in Mecca, many of them speak about Qiyamah, don't they? In Mecca you'll find many of the verses speak about the day of judgment. Why? Because there was a need to establish that your conscience should always be alive to the fact that there'll be a day when you will be raised alive to answer for what you did on the earth. If I know I have certain assets, but I don't have it in me to proportion or to give out those assets as it should be, then on the day of judgment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say to me, it's as if you didn't think there'll be a day I would have raised you to be accountable for those assets. Then you find the Imam says in another hadith, مَنْ لَمْ يَحْسِنْ وَصِيَّتَهُ نَقَصَ مِنْ عَقْلِهِ وَمُرُوءَتِهِ. Whoever does not perform a will, the writing of a will, then you find there is a reduction in his intellect and in his status as a human being. Now these are quite strong words from the Imam. That whoever does not write his will, there is a reduction in his intellect and in his status as a human being. Someone asks why? Because you, when you don't write a will, may be the cause of major calamities in your family. That when the Imams were stressing on writing a will, they were stressing on this why? Because they knew very well, if a father leaves a will behind, you'll still see arguments in the family, let alone if you don't leave a will behind. I tell you, there are some fathers who before they passed away, they left a will behind. And you'll still find the sons fighting over the terms of the will. You'll still find them. That no, I deserve this amount, no, you deserve this amount. Imam says that if this is the case when the father leaves behind a will, then if you who don't leave behind a will, don't describe yourself as a person of intellect. Because can't you see in the future that if you never left a will behind, if I now own 6 houses and I own 5 cars, and I even own shares in a certain company, if I don't leave a will behind to say what I own and how it's to be distributed, then I'm the cause of future trouble within my family. Imam says, make sure that you look after your will, because a sign of the intellect is someone who has a far-sighted vision. Someone who sees ahead of his time and ensures that a will is written in order that these calamities, we do not face them later on. Therefore, you found that within the school of Ahlul Bayt, there was a major focus on the importance of writing a will before you pass away. And that's why you find the school of Ahlul Bayt divides wills into 3. And it's vital that each of these wills, we understand them, because they affect each and every one of our life. The first type of will in the religion of Islam is known as al-wasiyya al-ahdiyya. What's al-wasiyya al-ahdiyya? Al-wasiyya al-ahdiyya relates to a will which I write, where in this will I think about God's rights over me and His creation's rights over me. And if I haven't performed God's rights over me and His creation's rights over me, in my will, before I die, I will mention them. Someone says, what do you mean? Hajj is one of God's rights over me, isn't it? Doesn't God have a right over me that I go to Hajj once in my lifetime? Isn't it a duty as much as prayer and fasting? It's ironic in this world, you'll see people pray 5 times a day, fast in the holy month of Ramadan, but completely postpone Hajj every year. Where did this come from? Fasting, prayer and Hajj are all in exactly the same level. Why are you praying and fasting all the time when your obligatory Hajj still hasn't been done? They're all on exactly the same level. But say, for example, I'm the type of person who applied to go to Hajj every single year. You know, now Hajj is quite easy, alhamdulillah. Now, anybody can go to Hajj. If you have the right connections, you'll go. You look at the time of the imams, you find they used to go walking to Hajj. They used to go 20, 25 times walking to Hajj. And you found that those who were in Hajj only 25, 30 years ago will tell you, you're lucky you have luxury hotels now, and now you have beautiful views. 25 years ago, 30 years ago, the burning sun of Arabia and we didn't know where we were staying. You find that someone may say, I tried to go to Hajj every year, Ya Allah. And the one time I had the chance, I fell ill. That person in his wasiyyah, in the wasiyyah al-ahdiyah, the wasiyyah of the covenants, the will of the covenants, will write very clearly that, Ya Allah, in my life I strived my hardest to go to Hajj. Just in case will not have gone to Hajj by the time I pass away, then Ya Allah, I ask my eldest son, for example, to look after the obligatory act of going to Hajj. Because the lady came to the Holy Prophet, she came to him, she said, Ya Rasulullah, I have a question to ask you. He said, so what's the question? She said, Ya Rasulullah, I want to ask you that my father did not go to Hajj. Do we have to perform a Hajj on his behalf? Rasulullah said to her, if your father had a loan which he owed someone, would you pay it? She said, of course I would. He then said, God's loan is greater than that. He saw Hajj as Allah's loan. That when you go to Hajj, you are going to share the treasures of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, aren't you? When you go to Hajj and say, Labbaik Allahumma Labbaik, you're sharing the treasure of God's palace, of His entire entity and existence. You therefore find that in Al-Wasiyyah Al-Ahdiyah, what do I do? If there is a Hajj which I am missing, then I will make sure in my Wasiyyah, in my will, before I pass away. And notice something very important. Someone said, Ammar, what do you mean before I pass away? I mean tonight. Because how do we know if we're going to stay alive tomorrow or not? Isn't that true? As in you'll find some people do not realize one particular phrase. The only certainty in this life is death. How ironic. The only certainty in life is what? Death. There's no other certainty. The only certainty in life is death. When you see the graveyards, it reminds you that there are many who came before me. And some of them were kings, and some were paupers. But when we go 6 feet under the ground, who knows who the king is, and who knows who the pauper is? You therefore find that when it came to that idea, if I haven't been to Hajj now, I may be in my 20s. Should I write in my will from now that just in case I do not go to Hajj, then I want my family member to perform it on my behalf? Yes, you should. From now. Of course, we pray to Allah that He grants us a long life. There's no doubt. But you find that Al-Wasiyyah Al-Ahdiyah is when a person writes down, for example, Hajj. It's not just Hajj. I tell you, there are people who may be in this hall today, or maybe in other communities. You say to them in your teens, did you pray or no? No. So when did you become religious? In my mid-20s. So what were you doing before then? I didn't pray much. How much did you pray? Nothing at all. Those years of salah, you think it's easy, so a person becomes religious and that's it. You forget those years? Those years have to be made up. All of them have to be made up. And when they all have to be made up, you don't know if you're going to get there in time, do you? Because when you start calculating them, when you start seeing 6 zeros next to the number, you begin to think to yourself that I don't think I'm going to make this up. So what do? In Al-Wasiyyah Al-Ahdiyah, you will write that there are this number of prayers which I need to make up. Don't reach the day of judgment saying, Ya Allah, I became religious. Are you seriously telling me I had to do those prayers? No, you had to. That was an obligation you owed Allah. That was Allah's loan on you. Write in your will from now that just in case there's a certain number of years of prayers which I haven't performed, I want to ensure that they are performed in this lifetime. In other words, you have salah, you have hajj, that's in al-wasiyyah al-ahdiyah. Then you have a second type of will, of the utmost importance. That is what, also in al-wasiyyah al-ahdiyah, what do you have? Also in al-wasiyyah al-ahdiyah, you have the money you owe God's servants. Because you've got God's rights over you and His servants' rights over you. There are some of us, we already owe certain people in the community money. Isn't that true? There are some of us who may have outstanding loans, outstanding debts. I have to write in my will that outstanding loan. There's no way I can turn around and say that, you know what, at the end of the day, I passed away, it's not my fault, the death came to me at that time. No. In your will you write, person X, I owed him this amount of money. Person Y, this amount of money. If I am not alive, then please, my son, my daughter, my cousin, my uncle, my grandfather, please make sure that you pay it back. How many times have you seen when someone passes away, his eldest son may stand in the funeral and say, oh people, if there is anyone who my father owed money, please come and ask. Isn't that true? It will happen. Because there's a recognition that I may have fulfilled all my duties to Allah. But how about if I haven't fulfilled my duties to the creation of Allah? That's why I tell you, two personalities in history before they died, their main focus was, have I left a trace of money I owe to someone or no? The first of them, Muslim ibn Aqil. Muslim ibn Aqil, when Ibn Ziyad was about to throw him from the palace, Muslim ibn Aqil, just before he was beheaded, said to Ibn Ziyad three things. He said to him, number one, do you mind giving me an Islamic burial? I want you to wash my body and bury me in the Muslim way. Number two, tell Imam al-Hussein not to come towards this land, because the people are going to betray him. Number three, I owe someone in the community money. Do you mind paying the money off on my behalf? Ibn Ziyad looked at him and he said, as for the Islamic burial, you can forget about that burial. As for Hussein not being told, there will be no one who will inform him. But as for your money, I'm an Arab, and it's only the right of another Arab, or I am a man of principle, and it's the right of a man of principle to help a man of another principle, that I'll look after that loan and I'll pay it off. Muslim bin Aqil is about to be killed, but look at what's in the back of his mind. How will I answer my Lord about a debt that remains on my shoulders? It's better that I speak to my killer, and in the hope that my killer will pay off the amount that's outstanding. I tell you, there are Muslims in communities today. You go to him, you say you've owed this person money for years now. How many more times until you are willing to give it back? And they'll reply to you by saying, I don't want to give it back. It's up to me. In my own time, I'll give it back. And you're like, aren't you afraid? Or don't you have a conscience? One day you're going to be asked, not at all. When that conscience dies, then know that humanity is facing death as well. And the second one, our sixth Imam before he passes away. Our sixth Imam before he passes away, what do we find? We find our sixth Imam before he passes away, of the last lines, he says, I have 70 dinar which I owe my cousin. Someone comes to him and says, Imam, your cousin, the one who tried to stab you? There was a cousin of Imam Sadiq who tried to stab him one day. Imam said, yes, that cousin. So the person said, Imam, why are you so concerned about giving them 70 dinar? He replied, do you want me to be of those who Allah curses on the day of judgment for breaking relations with his family members? That's my family member. He has a right over me. There is an amount which I had to pay him, and now the amount will be fulfilled. In other words, in Al-Wasiyya Al-Ahdiyya, God's right over us, His creation's right over us has to be fulfilled. Then you have Al-Wasiyya Al-Tamlikiyya. What's Al-Wasiyya Al-Tamlikiyya? As I said, in Islamic law, 1/3 of my assets, I can dispose of them as I want. 2/3 are governed by the Quran or by the Sunnah. In that 1/3 of my assets, I can dispose of them as I want. What can I dispose of them? In which ways, for example? For example, I may dispose of them that there's a certain charity I want to organize. Or there's a hospital I want to build. Or for example, with these assets, I want to convert them into centers for learning, centers for education. Even if I feel, please understand this very delicate point, even if I feel that the 2/3 which the Quran and the Sunnah is appropriating to a family relative is not enough for that relative, then from the 1/3 I may say, from that 1/3 I want extra to be given out of that family member which the 2/3 is to be paying for. Because remember, I've got 1/3 at my disposal. 2/3 is to give family members. I may have an auntie in that particular 2/3. I believe the amount that will reach her will not be enough. And then some people will complain, how is Islam fair? My auntie or my cousin deserves more than that, what's given in that 2/3. Then why from the 1/3 that you're allowed to dispose of, why don't you mention them in your wasiyah? Mention them. Say in the 1/3 that I want to dispose of, I want some of that 1/3 to go to my auntie's portion in the 2/3. In other words, you are allowed to dispose of that 1/3 as you like. 1/3 of your assets in your will, you're allowed to dispose of as you like. 2/3 are according to the Quran and Sunnah. You leave a wife behind, you leave a daughter behind, you leave sons behind, you leave parents behind. The Quran and the Sunnah has accumulated, each one of them gets a portion of the assets which you've left behind. And I tell you, when you look in Islamic history, what do you find? In Islamic history, you find that there were wills that could have been written and were not. There were wills that were written and were extremely funny when you read them. And then there are wills which are known as the wills of advice for a family, which I will come to in a second. What do I mean? There were wills that should have been written but weren't. Rasulullah's will. Rasulullah's will should have been written, but it wasn't. Someone says, which will of Rasulullah are you talking about? Not the will of his assets. The will of his assets was written. Ali ibn Abi Talib was put in charge of the assets of Rasulullah. Rasulullah's assets, Imam Ali was told, this is the way you distribute them. And he gave him the terms and all of the details of how they were to be distributed. But the will of Rasulullah in terms of advice for his nation wasn't written. You see, the third type of will in the religion of Islam is not the will of your assets, nor the will of God's rights over you, but the will which is advice which you leave behind for your family. And this will we have underestimated in our communities today. What do I mean? I mean that if I'm a father, for example, I have 4 sons, or I'm a father with 2 sons and 2 daughters. I know my sons and my daughters' characters, don't I? I know which one of them is arrogant, which one is stubborn, which one is rude, and which one's humble, don't I? I know inside out. I know the one who'll cause a headache for the family, and I know the one who'll give his heart to the family. Many of us, when we write a will, we are more concerned that the assets are spread, aren't we? We're concerned that the assets reach. What we forget is to write a will where we say, for example, Ali, treat Fatima like this because you know Fatima's heart is soft. Ali, treat your brother Ja'far like this because he can be stubborn with the wealth. Ali, treat your sister Ruqayya in this way because you know very well that she has never looked for money in her life. I want you to give her more. We in the Muslim communities, this third type of will is the most important will out of all of them. Do you know why? The other 2 aren't wills between humanity. They are more legal wills. This will is when a father writes before he dies that I want to give advice as to how you children behave with each other. This will that I'm discussing in the next 8 nights of Ali ibn Abi Talib is not a will of Ali's assets. It's a will of Ali's advice to his nation. Ali's advice to the way his followers should behave. Rasulullah, before he died, wanted to write a will like this. They blocked him. Go to Sahih Muslim, the chapter of writing wills. All of you tonight. Sahih Muslim, the chapter of writing a will. Or go to Sahih al-Bukhari, the chapter of al-Jihad was Siyar. Go in that chapter and read about the calamity of Thursday. Ibn Abbas narrates the calamity of Thursday clearly. He says, we were sitting gathered around the Holy Prophet. The Holy Prophet clearly said, I want you to give me a pen and paper so that I may write for you that where you will not go astray. Many times people ask me a question about this issue. They say, if the will was so important, why didn't the Prophet get to write it? The Prophet's legal wills were all written. This was a will of advice. A will of advice is not wajib, it's only recommended. When the Prophet came to write this will, the Prophet asked Ali ibn Abi Talib, Ali, come. I want you to write this will on my behalf. That he began talking. All of a sudden someone stood up and he said, the Prophet is delirious. The Quran is enough for us. That Prophet of yours, when Allah sent him, who are you to come and question the mouth of Rasulullah? When you come and say the Quran is enough for us, that's an added statement. What do I mean? I mean that not only are you calling the Prophet of God delirious, on top of that, when you say the Quran is enough for us, who are you to tell us the Quran is enough for us? Are you the Prophet or is he the Prophet? When the Prophet himself is about to write something, when that person says the Quran is enough for us, do you know what he's saying? He's saying, I know what you're going to write. You're going to write, I leave behind for you 2 things where you will never go astray. The Quran and my Ahlul Bayt. His words to the Prophet about the Prophet's will, the most important piece of advice in Islamic history. As the Prophet's about to write the will, you find that he says, the Prophet is delirious. The Quran is enough for us. And you know, I wish he called him the Prophet. Do you know what he actually said? The man is delirious. There's a difference when you say the man is delirious and the Prophet is delirious, isn't it? In one of them, you are showing belief. In the other one, you are showing that this man may be a sorcerer. Maybe a sorcerer like any other person. The man is delirious. The Quran is enough for us. The irony of this statement, what is it? The irony of this statement is that you find that the Prophet was seeking to leave a piece of advice, that these are meant to be his companions who are loyal to him, who are meant to listen to his every word. The Quran says, whatever the Prophet gives you, take. And whatever he tells you to stay away from, you stay away. When the Prophet asked for this piece of paper, there was such an uproar between the companions that the Prophet ordered all of them, leave, leave. Only Ali stay, Abbas, Fadl. Other than them, none of you stay. I want them to stay. He wrote a wasiyah. Ali ibn Abi Talib took that wasiyah on board. You find that this wasiyah, what type of wasiyah was it? It wasn't a wasiyah of law. Many of us in our communities only follow the legal will. One will which we haven't followed is when a father sits his children down and tells them, my wasiyah to you is to do this. My wasiyah to you is to do this. My wasiyah to you is to do this. Why? Because children love their parents. They love their father. Sons and daughters appreciate the efforts of their father. If a father tells his son, this is the way I want you to be, that stays in the heart of that son, isn't it? If you tell your son, for example, I live behind an apartment, I live behind, for example, cars, you'll look at that particular will and there'll be a squabble between you. If your father looks at you in the eyes and says, I beg you, don't bring disunity in the family, I beg you, and I'm asking you sincerely, you, of all the brothers and sisters, do not bring disunity, that stays in your heart, it won't leave you. And that type of will we need more of. And therefore you found that that will, known as the will of advice, you found the Prophet tried to write it, they blocked him. I'll never forget, Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, the Umayyad Khalifa, tried to do the same will. When he heard the Prophet was leaving a will of advice, Abdul Malik ibn Marwan said, I'm going to do the same will of advice. They said to him, so what's your will of advice? He said, oh my dear sons, fear Allah and look after your uncle Hajjaj bin Yusuf al-Thaqafi. Look after your uncle Hajjaj bin Yusuf al-Thaqafi. Hajjaj bin Yusuf al-Thaqafi, who is he? Hajjaj bin Yusuf al-Thaqafi, the man who said, I wish I was at Karbala on the 10th of Muharram, so I could have been the one who beheaded Hussein when he lay on the ground. This Abdul Malik bin Marwan, this was his advice to his ummah. I make sure you fear God and look after your uncle Hajjaj, because he has looked after us, and if it were not for him, none of us would be in power. Yet you find that some of these wills, apart from the legal ones, some of them, the wills of advice, remain with us until today. And arguably in the 20th century, the greatest will ever written in terms of advice was the will of the great scholar Ayatollah al-Mar'ashi al-Najafi. That great scholar, who many of you who've been to Qum would have been to that famous library of his. You know that library, how he built it? He'd go and earn money. As soon as he earns his money, he goes to the British who used to have Islamic books and manuscripts and he buys them. Sometimes because he didn't have money, he'd go and pray salah on behalf of someone who had many prayers which weren't done from their parents. Whatever he'd earned, he'd go and make that library. That library today is the most glorious library in the city of Qum. And that Ayatollah Mar'ashi Najafi, I ask all of you, try and read his will of his pieces of advice which he gave his son before he died. Because unfortunately today, many Muslim fathers and mothers do not write wills of advice. All they care about is wills of material. Whereas if more Muslim fathers and mothers focused on wills of advice, you'd see a change. You know what he says? He says, oh my dear son, in his will, and this is like the will of Imam Ali which we are studying in these nights. He says, oh my dear son, number one, be a righteous servant of Allah. Because the religion of Islam today is calling out, هَلْ مِن نَاصِرٍ يَنصُرُنَا. That's the first wasiyah. He says the religion of Islam today is calling out, هَلْ مِن نَاصِرٍ يَنصُرُنَا. Not just in Karbala, today. He says to his son, my first wasiyah to you is that the religion of Islam today is calling out, is there anybody to help this religion? He says, I want you to be a servant of this religion. Never let anyone remove you from serving this religion. Then he says, number two, I have a dua which I tried all my life. Whenever I tried this dua, it always worked. in qunut recite Allahumma bihaqqi Fatima wa abiha wa ba'liha wa baniha wa sirr al-mustawda'u fiha, you will always find the dua will be accepted when you recite this. Number 3, and this third wasiyah, I will tell you personally, I have tried. And I ask each one of you on this night, each one of you, begin this a'mal at home. If there's a certain area which you are being affected by, which you think you're not progressing in, which you're facing many obstacles in, begin this act and see how your life will change. Ayatollah tells his son, he says to him, oh my son, after Salat al-Fajr, when you wake up, read Surah Yasin. After Salat al-Dhuhr, read Surah al-Naba. You know, عَمَّ يَتَسَاءَلُونَ. After Salat al-Asr, read Surah al-Asr. After Salat al-Maghrib, read Surah al-Waqi'ah. After Salat al-Isha, read Surah Mulk. Tabarak alladhi. Read these and you will find every amal of yours, Allah will answer directly. I say to all of you sincerely on a night like this, those sisters who want to get married on a night like this, those brothers who want to get married, those families without children, the parents without, you find a father and a mother who don't have any children, those people whose family have faced an illness which they feel there is no cure. After Salat al-Fajr, Yasin. After Dhuhr, what do you recite? Naba. After Asr, you recite Surah al-Asr. After Maghrib al-Waqi'ah. After Isha, Mulk. And see how your life will progress after this. That there will be an increase. Then he says to him, number 4, memorize the sermon of my grandmother Fatima al-Zahra at Fadak. Memorize that sermon. He says, because I tell you, there are blessings from that sermon. Number 5, and this line is one which reaches the heart. He says, bury me with the black clothing I wore when I remembered the family of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. Every piece of black clothing that I wore, I want you to cover my body with. Because that black clothing will speak for me on the day of judgment. That was the clothing which I attended the majalis of Hussein and his family with. Then number 6, he said to him, make sure you recite the tasbih of my grandmother Fatima al-Zahra. Never neglect that tasbih. Always in your life, make sure you recite it. Then number 7, he said to him something very interesting. He said, recite the sermon of Shaqshaqiyya of Imam Ali from Nahj al-Balagha. That sermon when Imam spoke about how much they oppressed him when they took his leadership away. When he spoke about how he felt that there was a thorn which was stuck within his throat because of the rights they took away from Ali ibn Abi Talib. And I tell you, you find that that particular last advice he gave him was an advice we don't appreciate. How much Ali ibn Abi Talib went through struggles in his life for this religion. How much he sacrificed for this religion in order that the religion reaches us the way it's reached us today. You find on a night like this, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib sitting with his family, sitting with his friends. You find that all of them in the house today. And even when you hear the story of Sayyida Zainab alayhi salam on a night like this, on the 19th of Ramadan, Sayyida Zainab narrates something very interesting. I want you to all focus here on this narration. Sayyida Zainab on a night like this, what does she state? She states that on a night like this, I prepared the iftar for my father. When my father came home, just focus on these words. When my father came home that night for iftar, I prepared him his iftar. He looked at the iftar, then he looked at me and he said, Zainab, when have you known me to have such a grand meal? She said, Dad, all I've prepared you is salt, yogurt and bread. Tell me, is that grand? That's grand? Salt, yogurt and bread? He said to her, Zainab, when have you known me to have had such a grand meal? Oh, Zainab, don't you know the one who eats a grand meal, his day of judgment is prolonged? I don't want to face Allah except with an empty stomach. She said, I looked at him and I thought, why does he say, I don't want to face Allah except with an empty stomach? What does he mean, I want to face Allah, I don't want to face Allah? What is he saying? Is there an indication that this could be the last of the nights of Ali ibn Abi Talib? She then said that I saw him walking to the window of the house and come back. Walk to the window and come back. When I saw him walk to the window and come back, he'd walk to the window. I'd say to him, Father, why are you walking towards the window of the house? Why are you coming back? He said, I'm looking outside and I know that this is the night which Rasulullah promised me. This is the night when my Lord will congratulate me for my actions. Then later she narrates, she says, I saw my father, the man with all his strength in the battlefields. And on a night like this, I saw him walking and shaking. I looked at him, I said, Father, you have all your successes on the battlefield. What is wrong with you? He says to her, Zainab, I saw your grandfather Rasulullah in a dream last night. And he said to me, Ali, this is the night you will come back to us. Then Sayyidah Zainab narrates, she says, I ran to my brother Imam al-Hassan's house. I said, Hassan, my father is speaking in this way. I beg you, come and see my father. When Imam al-Hassan came, he said, Father, Sayyidah Zainab says you're talking in this manner. Is it true? He said, yes. He said, my father, what are you trying to tell us? He said, Hassan, last night I saw Jibreel in a dream. And he brought 2 stones and he rubbed them. Dust fell on the land of Mecca. Dust fell on the land of Medina. And dust fell on the land of Kufa. I have a feeling that tonight my name will be announced in Mecca and Medina and Kufa. That the world will hear that tonight is the night when Ali ibn Abi Talib was struck. When he was leaving the house, Imam al-Hassan begged him, and this line is a line all of you can relate to. He begged him, he said, Father, let me come with you to the mosque. Imam turned around to him and said, Hassan, look after Zainab, look after Kulthum. Don't leave them alone. They are your sisters. If you want, come later towards the mosque. And even as the Imam was leaving, his cloak got stuck to the door. And he turned around and he said, Oh soul, do not be scared of death. In this world you either smile or you cry. And he began to walk towards the mosque. May Allah give you patience in this period. When Ali ibn Abi Talib began to walk towards the mosque, upon entering the mosque, he noticed that there were people who were sleeping on the ground. When he noticed these people sleeping on the ground, he noticed that there was one person in particular who was sleeping on his stomach. When he saw this person sleeping on his stomach, the narrations say to us that he came up to him, he said, Oh man, wake up, do not sleep the sleep of shaitan. For the sleep of shaitan is when someone sleeps on his stomach. It's as if he knew that the man had a sword which was within that trouser which he was wearing. The Imam went towards leading that final prayer. When he went towards leading the prayer, the adhan was recited. The narrations mention he began his salah. He moved towards his ruku'. Then he came down towards his sujood. From the back of the lines, Abdurrahman ibn Muljam came towards Ali ibn Abi Talib. When he came towards the Imam, he struck the Imam on his head when he was lying on the ground. As soon as the Imam was struck, Imam al-Hassan and Imam al-Hussein ran towards their father's body. This particular line is one which affects you. Imagine you see your father's head when he was dying. You see the blood surrounding his face. Imam al-Hussein lifted the head of his father. As soon as he lifted the head, the conversation began between them. When he lifted the head of his father, Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen looked towards Imam al-Hussein. He said to him, Hussein, is that you? He said to him, yes it is. He said to him, oh Hussein, you hold my head today, whereas who will hold your head on the 10th of Muharram? The narrations mention to us that when Imam al-Hussein carried his father, Imam al-Hassan carried him as well. They left the mosque. As the Imam was leaving the mosque, the Imam was limping because the injury had begun to affect him. So he was limping as he was walking, but then when he got nearer to the house, he saw Zainab, he saw Kulthum at the door. He looked to Imam al-Hassan, he said, oh my son Hassan, make me stand up straight. He said to him, why? He said, I cannot bear to let Zainab see me in this state. I say to him, O Amir al-Mu'mineen, if you couldn't bear to let Zainab see you on this state, then how would you have seen Zainab on the 10th of Muharram when she saw shimmer sitting on the chest of Imam al-Hussein when he lay on the ground? Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to raise us with Muhammad and Al Muhammad, to allow us to be amongst the companions of Imam Sahib al-Asr wal Zaman, Inshallah, tomorrow we will continue with the first part of the wasiyah of Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the intercession of Imam in this world and the hereafter with the Surah Al-Fatiha, but before it, the loudest of your salawat.